we're going to spend a little time here for probably about the next 45 minutes going over what it's like getting started with privacy management. As Shilpa said, it's a brand new product for us. We just put it in preview over at Inspire, and we're really excited for what's going to be coming with it. So we're going to touch on a couple things here. The first, just getting started. How do I get this license? How do I get it activated in my environment? Then we're going to go over the out-of-the-box configurations that Shilpa had talked about. We're going to go over creating your own policies and how to configure that and the options available to you. We're going to go over the subject rights request process. Shilpa touched on it there, but there's really a lot. The violations, the alerts, the notifications, both from the administrator and the privacy manager side, as well as the end user, to see, what does this look like? How does the user interact with all of that? So Tiffany mentions here, obviously this is all NDA. I also really want to remind people this content is still in preview. So if I show something today and when we launch in a little bit, or you go look at this on your own and it looks slightly different, it's because we're iterating based on your feedback that's coming in right now. We want to really make a splash. We want to help this launch. We want to help it be successful. So if you see things, if you have ideas, please submit feedback. But take it with, that if something's in a certain position now, it may not be there in that exact spot a month from now. So with that, I'm going to flip over to a Microsoft 365 tenant here and get started. So privacy management is part of Compliance Center, and it's where you're going to go to find it. When you log into Compliance Center, and if you've logged in recently or you have a new tenant you've stood up, you may see this new box here called the Privacy Management Trial. We're really trying to bring this front and center. And you can click on this right here to learn more. You can choose to start a free preview. Moving forward, we're going to try and make this easier for people to start this free preview, but the steps we'll go through right now will take us through the license process. So we can click here. And what that will do is actually take us to the privacy management page. You'll also be able to see this down here on the left-hand rail. So you can see a couple sections. Right now, this tenant doesn't have anything set up for privacy management. So all the pages that we click on in privacy management will just show us this, hey, we haven't started. We need to get going. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get our trial licenses. Right now, there is a 30-day trial license for privacy management that you can try out in your environment. And what we'll do here is just go over the process. We'll get this activated. We'll show what it looks like once we get up and going here. Couple things I want to point out while this page is loading. You do need to obviously be a global admin to add any privacy licenses to your environment. And you also, if you're not a global admin, you need to make sure from Exchange Online that you go and add the administrator account that's going to be working in privacy management to the compliancy management and the audit log roles. And we'll go into why we need that in a second here. And of course, because I wanted to show this off, it is taking a little while. So the purchase process here is very similar to other service purchase processes, trial licenses that you've done in Office 365 in the past. You'd accept the license, accept the terms, and then it would take you back and say, okay, now we need to go and license the users. To get started with privacy management, you need to license it on at least one user. So you maybe want to go looking up the user account information for your administrator, but you're going to need to make sure, very similar to Defender for email or any of the other solutions, that you have enough licenses for everybody in your environment that's going to use the solution. So we're going to go back. We're going to just pretend for a little while that we license our user. The other thing we need to do is grant permissions. Like everything else that is in Compliance Center, by default, nobody in the environment has permissions to use that piece of the service or access the data, including the administrator accounts. So the other piece we're going to want to do is go ahead and create the permissions. We can click on the link here, or we can go to the permissions tab up here in the left. And when we go down here to roles, what you're going to notice, and we'll search for privacy just to make this list a little shorter, is there are a number of built-in role groups already available for privacy management. So if you're a larger organization that has delegation and responsibility, you want to use least privileged access, what you're doing, we have some built-in role groups already. So if we look at privacy management administrators, for example, we can see it's only got a few roles assigned to it that are relevant to administering the solution, but may not be similar to, if we look at investigators, a different set of roles in the role group. To get started, for the purposes of this demo, and if you're just getting started, privacy management as a single name, this has all the assigned roles within it. So similar to any other piece of solution, we would go here, we're going to choose our members, we're going to add them. In this case, we're going to take our administrator, select it, we're going to add, and we're going to say done and save, and it's going to add that to the group. One thing I want to point out, and I mentioned this earlier before we get into the privacy management piece, is you do need the unified audit log turned on to use privacy management. So in this case, well, the easiest way to look at this, if you don't know if you have it on or off or not, is to go to the audit tab. And if this box pops up, you don't have the unified audit log turned on. You need to be a global administrator to enable this. So if you're not, you may want to have your global administrator go and do this. This is turning on organization customization and then enabling the unified audit log. Once you do that, it does take a little while for it to start recording the activity and putting the data in here, and then a little more to start capturing the data. So if you're familiar to using audit for anything else, it's using those same features. Privacy management is pulling on those same capabilities that are built into the fabric of Microsoft 365. So I'm not going to click here. This actually is a process. It takes a little while to get up and going. Once you're all set, this page, again, it can take a little bit to get started once the license is granted and you have the permissions set up. So we're going to use the magic of demos to go over to an environment where I already have all of this configured. And I believe that would be this tab over here. So what we have here, again, we're at the Compliance Center homepage. And when we go down to privacy, and the first thing you notice is there's no longer a card here showing let's get started with privacy management because we have it set up. So when we look at the overview here, what you'll notice is those cards these 6 new pieces of information. We've identified 4 risks, and we've had 2 new subject rights requests. As we go down, we bring in some more information. So we have key insights. What data is out there? What personal data types have been discovered? Where it exists in the environment? And does it relate to any data subjects that we've put together? So when you click Explore here, it actually opens up the data profile viewer. I'll show that off in a minute. I just want to go through everything else here first. And the same thing is here. All of these boxes will go into data profile viewer and have some existing filters configured. So you can very much get in and look at, okay, what are the most common matches for this week? Similar to other pieces in Compliance Center and Microsoft 365, we have our active alerts that are available. So you can quickly see, okay, what types of alerts did I have? What severity? We have the ability to filter on 7, 30, and 90 days, quick at-a-glance views. Same thing with personal data that's found in the organization. We can get some views, we can get some trends over time, where that data is located. Data transfers, we'll go over to this in a little bit, but where are people sharing information, whether it's cross-border or cross-department, it's going to show here. Unused personal data, one of the other big policies that we'll touch on, it would show here, as well as that overexposed. This piece right here, as we have subject rights, and not sure why the chart is not showing now, but you get a vision of the globe and you can say, okay, as I configure subject rights, where across the country or across the world are they coming from? And we'll go over kind of how that populates in there. as well as all the information on subject rights requests I have going on here and when they're available. Usually when someone puts in a subject rights request, whether they're in your organization, outside your organization, a customer, there's a deadline from a filing perspective and from a regulation perspective of when you need to service it by. So we bring that up front and center and says, hey, you've got this many more days to finish it. We'll go into how to do that more in a little bit. Next tab, and I'm going to go through each one of the sections here in privacy management, is the data profile section. And if you have any questions while we're going, please go ahead and put them in the chat. There's a couple of our colleagues here that are able to answer, and we should have some time at the end of this for any kind of immediate Q&A should a burning question come up. So the first thing that comes up is the data profile, and it shows the information here. Before we dive into this, and I'll show it off in a second, I wanted to go over the global settings that were available in privacy management. So as you see here, I clicked on the gear in the upper right, and there's 5 key things that are here right now. The first one is that data anonymization. Shilpa mentioned this when she was going over the architecture of privacy management, but by default, we want to make sure that usernames in the platform are anonymized across all of the features. So this is turned on by default, very similar if you've used communication compliance or insider risk management. We want to anonymize the usernames so that there's one more or less chance of maybe an implicit bias coming in for the people that are reviewing any alerts or issues that come up. You can turn this off. We give you that option, but again, by default, it is turned on. User notification emails. So one of the key things that Shilpa was really excited. When I first heard about privacy management, I said, this is the thing that's really great is how do we coach our users? How do we say, hey, you may be sharing too much information. Can you take a look at this? Let me know if this is right. You need to be doing this or you shouldn't. That's through an email notification many times. So here we can globally turn off those notifications. So it wouldn't matter what you configured in your policies, but if you wanted alerts on, alerts off, notifications, we can globally turn this off. This may be a great thing to do when you're first setting things up, so you can have everything configured the way you need to, but there is an option to turn it on or off. Similarly, the Microsoft Teams integration. This is part of the subject rights request features, and every time I create a subject rights request, I'm going to create a team so that the collaborators that are working on it have a team site that's there that has all the information they need to. So again, they're not sharing information around. We don't have additional copies of this data when we're already trying to potentially, rein in how much data we have in our environment. So if your organization is using Teams, this is on by default. If you're not using Teams, maybe you want to turn this off. But go here, we can check it and save and move on. The next one here, data matching. If you already have maybe a DSR process or a subject rights process in place, and you'll notice I may use DSR and subject rights request interchangeably. DSR is the very specific data subject request of GDPR. So that's their formal term. Kind of the generic term is subject rights request. So you may hear me use it interchangeably during our talk today. But if you already have a personal data schema that you're using in your organization, you can add it in here. And that way, as you're using subject rights requests, as you're exporting data, as you're working with those APIs that Shilpa had mentioned, you can have that same schema, kind of an end-to-end process. So for the purpose of this demo, we don't have any of those things hooked up. This organization is just getting started with privacy requests. So we're going to use the out-of-the-box schema that we've put together. The last piece I want to touch on are data review tags. This is another piece supporting the subject rights request. As your collaborators are reviewing the data, maybe there's notes they want to make and say, hey, I need to follow up on this document, or we need to delete this one, or we need to delete this section. So we've got a couple custom tags from the system, as well as custom ones that we can edit. So we can click on it and change this to very important. And those are things that we can filter on when we're looking at the data in our subject rights request. So these are kind of global settings that will flow down to the various pieces that are in privacy management. Okay. So with all that, and this is accessible, these same settings from all the other pieces. If you click on the gear, you're going to get to these same policies. When we look at the data profile view, so as I mentioned, we'll see here we've got 378 data types identified in SharePoint and a whole lot, 1.8 thousand in OneDrive for Business right now. This is pulling, and we'll go over how to set this up, but it's using those same sensitive information types that you're already configured for data loss prevention, for information protection, for your records management. So if you have custom company sensitive information types, or if you've got certain thresholds that you've adjusted on the default ones, we're using and we're able to reuse those same ones. So you're looking for the data in the same way that is the way your organization or your company needs to look for it. So when we click on Explore, and if you're used to content search in any of the other pieces of Compliance Center, this is going to look very familiar. But what we have a filter on is all the different types of data profile we see in the organization. And this is all set up by those out of the box policies that Shilpa mentioned. So we didn't want to start everybody with a blank slate. We immediately wanted to come in and show, hey, you've got potentially have privacy related information. You should start looking here, and then you can start deciding, all right, what do I need to do for my organization that's specific for my regulations, my requirements. So one I'll show here, credit card numbers, an easy one. We can say, I've got 104 copies in OneDrive of credit cards and 17 in SharePoint. If we click through, very similar to using content search, if you've used that before, what sites it's available to, how many copies. I can search if I know exactly where I'm looking for, or if not, I've now got that list of files. And very quickly, that sensitive information type shows, is it a high confidence match, medium confidence, low confidence, and what sensitive information type flagged. So this file, darkness.csv, is riddled with personal information. It's probably something we're going to want to take a look at. And if you're using other tools such as data leakage protection, it may have already been flagged by those. So privacy management doesn't work in a bubble. It's using the same features and capabilities that we've enabled for other solutions in the compliance suite, but it's putting that privacy management user education lens that's very specific to companies that are looking to automate that privacy workflow for themselves. So that's privacy or the data profile. Not a whole lot in here. There's another view. You can get a quick report of what's going on by credit card numbers. If I had multi-geo set up in my environment, so I'm using multiple Microsoft 365 data centers or that preferred data location set on a user's Azure directory account, then the data type by region would start lighting up. In this case, this demo is all in one geography. It's here in the United States where I am. So we don't have that data type by region configured. Okay, so next we're going to flip over to the policies section. And very similar, we have that same card and report view that we've seen in the other pieces going on here. So when we look at the cards very quickly, we first had the policy status. This is that overview of all the policies we have configured. We don't have a lot in this tenant right now. It is a preview and a test tenant that we use for demos. So we can see we have 2 policies in testing and 3 turned down. We'll go over what's going on in there in a minute. We have our alerts. So if there were alerts that were fired, they would show up here. It's a very short time frame on this graph. We can also click here and it would open up an alert browser of what's going on. Not a whole lot to show. There's only one alert. We'll touch on what that shows up in a minute. And then we also have issues. So if you're similar to, or if you're familiar with kind of our security hunting tools or other alerts in the compliance center tools, every alert you have to examine it. And if it's not closed automatically, you want to take a look and say, is this an issue? Is this not an issue? In this case, this one alert came in. I created it and said, this is an issue that somebody needs to investigate and look at. So that process follows through as we're looking at what's going on here. So that's kind of the cards there. There's not a lot of customization you can do to them right now out of the box, but it gives you that quick snapshot of what's going on in the environment. As we scroll down the page, you'll see here the list of policies that are in here. You can group them by default. They're grouped by status. You can turn off grouping. You can also group them by policy type. So you'll see here we've got data minimization, data overexposure, and data transfers that Shilpa had talked about earlier. So we could actually group by that. So maybe we are focusing on all of our policies about data minimization. We want to look at them all together. I can do that. We can also go ahead and just change the size of the list if we've got a lot here and add in additional columns in there. So we can say who created the policy, when it was created, when it was last modified, and who modified it. So many similar things. As we go through each of these, I'll touch on what those default out of the box ones are. By default, we have the 3 policies that Shilpa had mentioned configured out of the box. The first one is data minimum, and they're turned on. So they're not in testing. They're turned on, but alerting is not turned on for them. So we're not creating alerts for them, and we're not notifying users. This is very much to kind of help you get a handle of what is in your environment. The data discovery portion, kind of create that first, what I'd like to call that aha moment of, okay, this is where my data is. How do I now maybe coach my users, build my adoption and change policy, or configure other policies or alerts so I can make sure I have the best effectiveness out of these rules. So we have our data minimization. This is looking at old data, and there's some options to set. So we have data in our environment that maybe has been touched in 60 days or 90 days or a year. A lot of organizations don't want that extra data in their environment. It can expose them to enhanced litigation. Nobody's using it. So we want to alert people, says, you've got old data. Maybe you want to look at this and see if it's still valid. Kind of what I used to call the data hoarders that were in the world. Data overexposure. This looks at, are we sharing too much? The cloud is great. It's made it easier for us to collaborate, but it's also made it very easy to collaborate. So maybe we've shared things with external people and said, we've got anybody can access it with a link setting, or everybody inside the company can access this file as long as they have the link. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe this is meant for a small group of people, and we want to give people the opportunity to say, hey, I need to kind of maybe crawl back the permissions that I've granted here. And the last one, the data transfers. So this is looking out of the box for data that's crossing geographical boundaries. And when I talk geographical boundaries, specifically, we're talking Microsoft 365 data centers. So maybe I'm a multinational company that has this data transfer requirement, and I want to look at, as my team in Germany sharing information with the team in the United States, are they actually transferring that data? Are they emailing it? Are they saving it in different SharePoint sites? Or are they making sure that the data stays within the location it needs to stay? So that's what data transfers is tagging by default. You can also configure it to look at cross-departmentals. So previously in communication compliance, for example, we called that ethical walls. But here we're looking at so much more. We're looking at all sensitive information types, and it's not just a binary decision. We're putting some logic behind it of what is the data we're sharing, and not just we're preventing all communication between marketing and sales, for example. As I mentioned, the alerts for all these are off by default. If you like them, you want to start with them, you can also go in and edit these. These aren't locked in stone. So when it's any other policy, we can go in and change them. We can update what's going on with them. For the purposes of this, though, we are going to create a brand new policy because I want to go over everything that is available to you when you're making a policy. So it's actually a pretty straightforward process if you're used to making policies or rules in anything else in Microsoft 365. So you'll see right up top here, we have our Create a Policy button. What that will do is fly out this tab here on the right, and you'll see right out of the gate, we can always start with those templates: data overexposure, data transfer, or data minimization. We're going to start with a custom template here. I want to kind of walk everybody through everything that is available. to them when you're making a policy. So we're going to go ahead and click create, and this brings up a new policy creation wizard. Looks very similar to if you're using insider risk or communication compliance or even e-discovery. The same policies and settings or UI is in here. First thing we have to do is pick which policy template we want to start with. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to choose data transfer. It's kind of, I think, probably the easiest and most straightforward to set up. And what I want to put in here is, this is going to look at what we're doing. We have to give it a name. So we're going to call this the airlift policy and give it whatever name you want. You can put in a description. Always recommend putting something in here that's descriptive so you remember why you needed to do this. The next thing we need to do is identify what data we need to monitor. There was a question in the chat earlier of how do we identify which PII that we're looking for? And this is what we're doing here. And there's two ways we can do it. The first, and kind of, if you're just getting started, you don't have any, and you just kind of had the broad requirements, you haven't defined anything specific for your organization yet, will be those classification groups. So if we look here and we click add classification groups, what we can see is out of the box, there are 10 built-in classification groups that we've already configured that says these are the sensitive information types you need to comply with the Patriot Act or HIPAA or GDPR or the Australian Privacy Act. So if we click these and we add them in, what we'll see, and we'll add Patriot Act, GDPR, and HIPAA, and it adds it in, we can see here, it picks out all the sensitive information types from those out-of-box ones that you need to comply with that regulation from a data discovery perspective. So we have all the addresses, taxpayer numbers. Similarly with the HIPAA, we're looking at addresses, social security numbers, full names, medical terms. So all the AI and ML we're using on sensitive information types is being surfaced here as we grab them. If I know exactly what sensitive information types I want, I can also do that. I can build in that sensitive information type group. I can add in those specific out of the 261 out of the box sensitive information types we had. If I've built custom sensitive information types or edited out of the box ones, I'll see them in here. I can go ahead and pick them. I can pick as many as I want. I can add them in. I can change what confidence level I'm looking for them, how many instances I'm looking for. So if you have experience in working with sensitive information groups, you're able to put that together. We can create those groups. Move forward here. If you're just saying, I need to comply with HIPAA or some other regulation we've already got configured. You then need to figure out who this is going to apply to. So by default, we're going to choose everything in the all users and groups section. You can say, okay, maybe this only needs to apply to my R&D department. I would pick this as well. Then the next part is, where do I want to look? By default, we're going to look across everything that is in your Microsoft 365 tenant. So Exchange, OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint. All the policies and how those are scanned are the same as if you're using data leakage protection. So Exchange is going to look at items sent and received. OneDrive and SharePoint will be able to look at files as they're sitting at rest in the environment. Teams chat and channel is going to look at that information while it's in transit and being sent. So if it works, if you have success and you have some DLP policies that you're using, it's going to operate in very much the same way. On SharePoint, we can pick all SharePoint sites. We can, if we know the specific URLs we want to search, we can do that. You do get the picker if you have a lot of SharePoint sites and you don't know the exact names. So everything that's in your SharePoint you could add. We're going to stick with all SharePoint sites as we move on. The next thing, the condition. So what's going to fire this policy? We picked data transfers earlier. So we have two options. We have transfers between departments in our organization and transfers across country boundaries or regions. So when we look at the country or boundaries, as I mentioned, this is flagged by Office 365 data centers. So we list all the regions a Microsoft 365 data center is in. So you do need to know right now which data center your data is in and pick those specifically. We don't filter and show only the data centers you're configured for right now. Since I'm in a single data center right now, what I want to do is I'm going to pick departments. This is another thing. Maybe I don't want marketing sharing their information with anybody. Anything marketing does, I want to flag as a risky thing. So I'll add all other departments when they're sharing. We pick that and we see we've got that compliant, both sender and recipient departments are flagged in this direction. So it does work both ways. Now we want to figure out what happens when a policy is met. So we figured out what PII we're going to look for and what conditions we're going to do this for. So when it's being shared across departments, two things we can do. If it is done in Teams, Shilpa showed this off in her walkthrough, we're going to give them an alert to help them educate. So maybe we're only focusing this on email or not, or I'm sorry, SharePoint data. So maybe we won't put Teams on there, or maybe we're not using Teams, so it doesn't really apply to that organization. But most people are using SharePoint or email, so we maybe want to send that notification and says you're sharing too much information. The next thing we need to do is choose how often that notification digest gets sent. You can pick daily, and it's going to alert of anything that was captured in that day. By default, it is for weekly, and it will kind of collate everything that was done by a user over a given week. You can choose the day it wants to send. You can also choose monthly and only send it, every how many months. So you could say, I only want to send this alert once every 28 months. I don't know how effective that would be, but you have the option to do that. So we'll keep it as a default here. If you have either of these boxes checked, if we uncheck the email notification, you'll notice the frequency goes away. It's because Teams will send this every time it captures it. But you have to put in that URL that's going to say, hey, here's information about our organization's privacy policy. For here, we're going to put in, and it has to be a URL. It will actually catch you. And I noticed this when I was setting this up, is that if you don't put in a valid URL, at least formed, it will yell at you and say, hey, you need to put in a valid URL. It doesn't check it. It doesn't say, does this actually go to privacy training for my organization? But it does make sure when someone clicks on it, they're not going to end up at a dead URL. So that's the user notification side. Now we want to talk about what happens on the administrator side of things. And we can specify the threshold of how often the alerts are going to fire. Maybe you're just making this rule to coach users and to identify the data. You're not creating a bunch of alerts that are going to need to be acted on. We're very using this on a kind of a self-help place. But most organizations probably also want to get alerts so they can investigate, especially if there's a high volume of information going on. So by default, alerts are turned off. We can choose every time a match occurs, I want to create an alert that needs to be investigated. And we can choose the severity of those alerts. By default, it's medium. What probably you will end up doing when you're configuring it, or at least that's what we're seeing right now once it kind of gets into rollout, is some sort of threshold, either on the number of file sharing activities in a certain time frame. So maybe I see a specific multiple users sharing files over a period of time. It's got to be at least 3, in a certain number of hours, or we can filter it based on user. So I want to know the number of times Megan, if she's shared 50 files in the last 24 hours, that's cause for an alert. She'll still get coached either way for sharing it because we configure that in that outcome section. But if she only shares 10 documents over the span of 3 weeks, it's not going to create an alert. As we move forward, just kind of go through. I don't want to type in those boxes. We're just going to pick every time a policy match occurs. This could get a high volume, and it could include a lot of false positives, again, that you would have to investigate and say, this is real, this isn't. So you kind of want to find your balance and why you always want to tune this, no different than you would any other policy. Talking about tuning, the last thing you want to do when you're setting things up is that policy mode. So by default, it's enabled in what's called test mode. Test mode is very similar to any of our other policies. Notifications don't happen, but you can still get and alerts don't happen, but you can get all the insights. You can find, am I capturing the right data? Is it, do I have a lot of false positives? Is my search too wide or not wide enough? So you leave this on in test mode while you edit your policy and while you're pulling the information. And then when you feel you have everything up and going, go ahead and you can turn this to off. And now that policy is turned on. So turn off test mode to turn on your policy. Last setting we have is the summary, everything we've configured, everything we're going to do. You can edit anything here, and we're going to go ahead. We're going to click submit. That's going to submit our policy. It's going to create it. It's going to run through those last couple steps to get the policy in here. So the next thing I'm going to show off while this is finishing submitting, and I take a quick drink of water, is what a policy looks like that's been running for a little while. We've got a couple of policies here running in our environment, and it's actually captured some data. So the one I'm going to look at right now is our data transfer policy. We talked about this, it's very similar to one we just created. So a few ways you can do it. We can always delete the policy right here or view the details. And if we view details, what it does is it'll go into here, but it's also going to pop open the flyout here of, you can see everything that was configured. So by these default ones out of the box, you can see we've got a lot of different things that we're looking for and where we're looking for it. As we look into this one, the data transfers, few things I want to touch on up top as well. You can also, this is where you turn off the policy if you want to edit it or go ahead and delete it. They're all available up here. That's for every policy we've created. The cards here are very kind of high level, just to show the number of policies were there. User actions, so have we notified the user by email yet? Are there alerts, and has the administrator taken action on those alerts yet? Where the data is found, how many notifications were sent by the day they were sent out, and the matches by user, and what actions have been taken. We can get into the details here. This will actually take us to the matched items section, which is up top, which I'm going to go over right now. So when we pull on matched items, so you can see this looks very much like the same Content Explorer that we had in other things. And we have the ability, we can filter. So we can always have to choose location. We can identify how it was detected. We can filter, I only want to look at things that we created from OneDrive or Teams or Exchange. If you have a lot of information, you can sort the columns, we can customize it. In this case, Alex had a file that had a bunch of different personal information in his OneDrive. The system detected it in September. And the event that actually triggered it too is he created an anonymous link that shared it across departments. So if we looked at this, very similar, now we can get that information of what's going on. So we have the source file that would be the Excel sheet that is in there with all the data, so we can look what's in there. We can get all the metadata about that. So again, what location, how many data types, what data types were found. What I like too is the file activities. So what things happened to this file? Maybe Alex wasn't the only one that did privacy related things to this file. So it'll show all the file activities that were done. In this case, Alex created a link. And then we have the remediation history that shows what was done. In this case, the platform sent that digest email that says, Alex, you need to do something about this data. So this is a great place to kind of look and get an overview of what's flagging in individual sections. Go back to privacy management. That's really the privacy management side of things. So we want to create our policies, tune them, and figure out, do we want to have it mostly administrator level actions, or are we going more for the user coaching side of things? And we'll show what the user coaching looks like in a little bit. What I want to do now with the rest of our time today is go over the subject rights request side of the equation. So when we look at subject rights request, again, we have those cards, how many, real simple information here to begin with. How many are active, what's closed, what's overdue, another pie chart. the types of requests. So we have a couple different types of requests that we handle right now, and I'll go into those when we create one. But we get a chart of that over time, as well as all of the requests that are active and the state they're in that you can sort and filter on. Get started here. What we're going to do, though, because this really shows it off, is we're going to create that new request. So I clicked up there on the right for create a new request. And the first thing we need to do is the details about the data subject we're searching for. You're probably, if this is something you have to do, you probably have a form somewhere or an email address or a process to capture that information when someone says, I need to have I want to know what information you have about me in your organization. So first thing we need to do is that. So we're going to search for Alex Wilbur. These are free-form fields because, again, they could be inside your organization, outside your organization, from maybe they're a customer of yours, maybe they're a partner of yours. So everything in here is filled out, free-form, but there are a few that are kind of the minimums. You have to pick a country. Again, this is really useful when we're reporting. This is usually a requirement of maybe a specific policy of what it is. So we're going to say Alex is from Canada. Everything down here, the attributes, you can fill in a number of these. That gives the example of the phone number, but these are other things that the data subject may have given you that says, please search for this information about me. So in this case, we're going to do Alex's address, and he lives at 124 Fake Street in Toronto. And you can see here when I save this, it lets me now start putting additional information in. The next thing you want to do is choose how they're related to your organization. In this case, we're going to say Alex is a customer. This doesn't change any of the settings that we're discovering right now, but it is a thing when we're doing the report and we're filtering and we want those flags in the information. We do want to call out how they're related to the organization. Maybe you have different teams that look at employee subject rights requests versus customer subject rights requests. What type of data? So maybe the person just went to said, hey, do you have any information on me? I don't want it, but I just want to know what you have on me. So we have this access level of request. Maybe they put in a request that says, actually give me all of the data that you have on me. I want it. So we have that export level of request. And then the next one is what's called the tag list for follow-up. And this is, as Shilpa mentioned, maybe there is a file that is under litigation. Maybe there is a file that contains other company confidential information. And we just want to get a summary of these files that we may need to look at deeper. So we can build that search that is a tag list for follow-up that says, what do we want to look at? What we're going to choose here is export. What you don't see right now is the right to be forgotten, which is a very common thing in GDPR that says, show me all of my data, give me my data, and then delete my data. So we don't have that last part automated yet, but obviously once you have a list of all the data that is potentially relevant for a user, you could go through and remove it or scrub their information out of it manually. So it gives you all the data to do that. It's just not automated here yet. You can choose if it's really for a specific privacy regulation. So we have 5 items right now: Patriot Act, GDPR, CCPA, and the UK data protection. So as more things come in here, those will be coming in. Or you can just say, no, it's not specified. This person just wants to know. We have that deadline. So for the purposes of this, we'll give them till the end of the month to get this taken care of. And this just helps with that prioritization. Next thing we'll get, you have to name your search. That's our request and some information. This will help you find it if you've got a lot. And we go ahead, got some basic information. We go ahead, we create that request. So the next thing we'll show off is what actually happens once we've created this and what's in that search information. So we'll give it a second here to finish up. You see here, it gives you some next steps. So when you said done, it's going to show up in the list. The first thing you want to do is a data estimate. This is my basic queries, right? We'll go into that. Then we review it. we fill it, we go ahead and close it. So it gives you those next steps that you need to follow that the system's going to work you through. So you can see down here at the bottom, we've created that new request for Alex here for his DSR request. But what I want to go through now is what that actually looks like in the next step. So we've had a policy that I created a few days ago. We're going to look at for Nestor that's in that data estimate stage. So it's created kind of that first search of information. You can see for his request, he had 40 items across various sites he was looking for. When we look at what I want to show off here is the search query details. So you can see here the query that was created by that information we put in. So it's his name. In this case, I put in his full email address. But if you've done e-discovery searches before, you notice that looks very familiar. Building on that, I can go in and I can edit this search query however I want the leg. Maybe there's multiple emails or addresses or other ways they may be identified in my system. I can go and configure that. I can also pick all of the conditions, just like if I was doing any other search. So maybe only a certain time frame, maybe only the last 90 days or a year, or I only want information from certain participants or that have certain retention labels. So all the things I could do in a normal search query, I can also do within the construct of privacy management. Same thing with my locations I want to look for. So I'm not going to change anything here. We don't need to go through that. And then you notice a couple other tabs here: data collected, reports, notes, and collaborators. I'll touch on each of those in a minute as we go through another view. And then up here on the right, there's a few things. This is where we can edit and we can change those initial things we had about the subject request. We can close it. This is also where we can edit it or work together in teams. So if we clicked on this, what it's going to do is actually open up Microsoft Teams for me. And it's going to take me to that team site that was created for that search request. So we can see right here, I've got that Nestor search request, and now I can have a chat about that. So I'm not sending files over. Again, we want to limit the amount of information. I'm not sending files over email and say, hey, can you look at this? Can you look at that? I'm not sending potentially a lot of personal information all over those emails as well. I can control it inside the scope of that chat so we can work on it together and hopefully get things done sooner. The last piece I wanted to touch on here is Power Automate. So we have integrated Power Automate into this out of the box. And if we click on Power Automate, there's a few templates that we've already created here. So you can have a calendar reminder added to follow up on it. You can get the files by tag. You can pull that back. Or if you've got other case management systems that you use, such as ServiceNow, you can actually create a record in ServiceNow that I'm doing this case. So again, you want that kind of end-to-end workflow. A lot of folks are using ServiceNow as their ITSM platforms, so we can create that incident in ServiceNow. So once we're okay and it says my search is right, I'm pulling the right data, the next thing you would click on is retrieve data. What it's actually going to do is now take your search, go back and crawl all the locations you had at a full level and pull back all the data that we have on the search that we created. I'm going to flip over to one where we've done that because that actually takes probably 24 to 48 hours to usually search. It really depends on the amount of data that's in the environment. But you'll notice here, it changes the stage and we're now in review data. So we'll pull up one we did for Megan a little while ago. So you can see here, we have 1,900 files found for this search that we did for Megan. If there were priority items that maybe were flagged as with a classification tag or confidential, or maybe contain multiple people's data in it, it would show here. So maybe those are the ones you want to look at first. If there's not specifics, we'll go ahead and look at the data that was collected here. Again, we have that very similar Data Explorer view of the information that's going on. We have the ability to filter. We have the ability to look at a couple different locations. There's a lot in here. So everything that was scanned. So you can see I have text files, image files. This is going to dig into if I have zip files that are stored or other compressed files, it will go into those individual files. So all these ping files that are here, they were actually part of the zip file that was stored in a OneDrive site. And it'll go into there. So it won't just look at the top level files, it will dive a few levels deep. As we pull that up, and it's going to show our source. In this case, probably not a lot of information there. To shorten this up, I'm going to filter on Megan, just so we can say I only want to look at stuff where Megan was the content owner. This was for a former employee. So we can see here we've got only 59 items. What I want to show off here is the review status, and we'll go over how we flag that in a second. But this is identifying, do I want to include this in this export? Has it not been looked at yet? So somebody needs to look at it, or is it not relevant? And if we click on the little the ellipses here, we get all those options. There's also not a match. So maybe it grabbed this information and it's completely not relevant to this search. It's the wrong stuff. If you click not a match, it will reject it, but it will send that information back to the ML queries that are doing this to better train them for future searches. What we're going to go over here, we'll show off the Tailspin Toys proposal. This is one we still need to look at. So first we get is a summary of, we can look at it in Word. This is a Word document of information. We also can look at it in plain text. So if it was a large file, a large Excel, if you just want to look at the data, you can look there. What's really important, again, going back to you want to show the requester what information you have on them, but maybe there's company confidential information I don't want to show them. Maybe there's financials in here in this document that are also in there, or another person. So what I can do right out of here, very similar to if I'm doing an e-discovery request, is I can do make notes and I can do redaction. So I could click that in the drawing, choose area redaction, and I can drag it across on that information. And now that section is redacted. So if when I export this information, that's going to be in there. That data is not going to be seen by the user. And since it's an image file, they're not going to be able to remove it or scan for what data is underneath there. I can also create detail. I get all the details just as I would anything else. And I can create specific notes for a file. And again, this is for the team I'm working on. So if I can add a file note and Nestor's working with me on that, and I can say, Nestor, please look at the financials on this. And if I can spell, and this would be added there. This doesn't get exposed to when I export this, but this is a note for the team that I'm working on this. Once you're done, so the one other thing I wanted to show is the collaborators. As we mentioned, it sometimes takes a village to do these subject rights requests. So I only have the administrator in here. If I added other people, if I added anybody in here, that is Joni in here, and added her, she would not only get added to this case, it would not only show in her list, but she would also be added to this team that we had here. So if we looked at this, and we can see now that Joni would be added as a member and guest to that team automatically. So that's the process of creating it. When we're done, when we said we reviewed and included everything we want to include, we click on this complete review, we put in a note. What this process does is it basically locks the search, locks the review, says, I can't do anything more here, and then packages it up to actually be exported. And at that point, we'll show off one more here that goes into that. And we have one for Garrett that is ready to close out. And that means the data is exported. So you can see here it's at that generate report stage. And if I go to the report section here, now there's some additional information that's filled out here. So I've got all the items ready for the data subject in a file that it gives you the steps of how to pull it out of Azure. They've got the Excel file, so you have all the information, all the redacted files. This is for the user. We also have the audit log. So everything that was done, all the steps everybody has taken on this, we want to show that chain of custody. We want to show everything that was done if somebody questions it. So we have that audit log of everything that's put together. And then if we tag certain things to include just a raw list of all the files that we shared out to that user. Then we say, okay, we gave Garrett his information. We can go ahead, we can close out this request, and we're all set with that. So that's really the four big sections of privacy management as it exists today in its preview form. What I want to wrap up with, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for questions, is what's going on the user side of this situation. So let me flip over to my other window here, where I have Megan's Outlook open. So you can see here, we showed some policies that we had created, and we've got this email that shows Microsoft on behalf of your organization. So this is how it is right now. I believe, don't quote me on it, that there is some customizability coming into it, but it shows kind of that high level of, hi, Megan, in this case, you've got some items you haven't used in 60 days. The one thing I really like about this too is you don't have to look at these all at once. So in this case, when I looked at this file when I got it, I marked this first one as a false positive. When I come back, it already knows I've marked it. It doesn't ask me to look at it again. So this is a dynamic view that is inside here. So we can say, all right, this is an old file, personal data. If I clicked on it, it would open up my OneDrive. It's going to show me what information is in that Word document. So I can see here I've got some social security numbers. Maybe I shouldn't have social security numbers hanging around. So I can say, oh, you're right. I don't want to keep this. I'm going to go ahead and click trash, and it would delete the file, probably not letting me because I have it open and it's locked. I could also choose to keep it, and I can say I want to retain it, or hey, you're not right. This shouldn't be even captured. So either way, you have to provide that justification. This is important so that goes in the audit log of why did I actually try to do this. You also have that link I mentioned before. We call it avoid privacy pitfalls, but when I click on this, it's going to open up that other window, take me to my organization's privacy policy that talks about what we need to do and how to safeguard data from a privacy perspective. It is dynamic. So in this case, we have one that shows up. We shared certain items and we shared it in a problematic way. In this case, it's because of their department, that cross-border or the cross-department one I shared. So again, we can quickly here, I can choose, oh, sorry, I didn't want to share that. And Megan's going to say, I'm going to go ahead and revoke the access to this. So this is, you don't have to go into SharePoint. You don't have to go into OneDrive and click sharing and turn off sharing. We're going to be able to come right from our email, go ahead and revoke the access to that. And that is privacy management. So just in closing, please start exploring this. It's a brand new product for us. It's available for you to start trying now. It is in public preview. There are licenses available for all commercial tenants. So whether you're spinning up a trial or a demo, or you want to try this out in your production environment, you can get those trial licenses right at the admin center. We're going to share these decks later. This link is actually a deep link right to get those licenses, so you don't have to go through all the billing pages in the admin center. If you want to learn more, if you want to read into how to do all the things I showed off today, here's a link to all of our docs on docs.microsoft.com. And we will be adding to these as we get closer to the GA timeframe. So if you look at them and says, well, this one little step is not in there yet, or how do I do this certain thing? We will probably be adding to that in the very near future as we get closer to GA. And please give us your feedback. Can't mention enough, this is a very new product for us. It is a new piece of the compliance puzzle that we are doing. So we really want your feedback. Are there scenarios we haven't thought of? Are there use cases that you or your customers have thought of that you'd really like to see included here? Please let us know the good, the bad, the ugly. It's what's going to help us learn, and it's what's going to help us improve the product.